referred as the critical consciousness of the modern age. And he began his career without having the formal understanding of literature, but he is best known for advancing the close reading of the literature and for articulating the theoretical principles upon which these skills lead to practical criticism. Then I am going to discuss the obstacles faced by the students that resulted in the establishment of the practical criticism. Actually, practical criticism began in the 1920s with a series of experiments by I.A. Richards. He did his experiment on the students of literature. He took some poems and from them he removed the author's name and date of publication. He asked the students of literature to analyze the poems, but the students couldn't be able to analyze the poems without knowing the author's name, date of publication and background history of the poem or context. Then he became very disappointed after knowing that students lacked the creative abilities. There were many problems that students were facing while analyzing the poem. First is the problem of making out the plain sense of the poetry. The students cannot cannot convert the poem into the prose form. They cannot understand the poem without by simply reading the poems, and they misunderstand the feeling, tone, and intention of the poet. Second is the difficulty of sensuous apprehension. In many poems, words have the rhythm, and they have the moment and they have the rhythm when they read silently. But many students of literature cannot understand this thing. Third is the difficulty demonstrated by imagery, especially veiled imagery. When the students were reading the poems, the images created in the mind of one student are not similar to the ones that are created in the mind of other student, and both have nothing to do with the poet's mind. And Bisma will discuss the remaining obstacles.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, I am Bisma Mariam, and as Mubin has already told you about the experiments of I.A. Richards. I.A. Richards basically performed experiments on the undergraduate students, and he provided them with 13 of the poems. And then he asked them to analyze those 13 poems, and he didn't give them any historical background of those poems, and also didn't tell them about the author of those poems. So students face various difficulties and face many obstacles while analyzing those poems. As Mubin has already told you about the first three difficulties, that were the making the plain sense of the poetry, difficulty in sensuous apprehension, and difficulty in the presenting the imagery. Now I am going to talk about the mnemonic irrelevance. Do you have any idea about the word mnemonics? What does that actually mean?
That if we want to memorize some words.
Yeah, it is basically related to the memory.
And then we will relate that word to something that we know.
Yes, it is basically related with the memory, and so some readers have something already present in their mind. So they just started putting that analysis on the given poems. That was not correct, and it led to the misinterpretation of the text. Now the fifth obstacle that student faced was the stock response. Stock response is basically a ready-made response. That ready-made response was already present in the mind of the readers about some other poems, and they just put that response to the poems available to them by I.A. Richards, so that also led to the wrong interpretation of the text. The sixth one was sentimentality. Some readers were too sentimental and too much emotional while analyzing their poems, like we get too much sentimental while we analyze Talib's poem. So that was also incorrect, and that led to the misinterpretation of the text. Eighth one was inhibition. What do we mean by inhibition? Do you have any idea about that? Yes, it is the feeling of nervousness or shyness while we express something, right? So in inhibition, it was quite opposite to sentimentality. As in sentimentality, the readers were too much emotional while putting their own personal experiences. But in inhibition, the readers were less emotional than they ought to be, right? So inhibition was also one of those difficulties that was being faced by the students. Now we are talking about the ninth one, effect of presupposition. That basically deals with the fixed pattern about the themes. Fixed pattern about the theme means like if a reader has read a poem about the theme of nature in the form of couplet, he read that poem related to the theme of nature in the form of a sonnet. So he considers that the theme of nature can only be expressed well in the form of the couplet, and it can't be expressed well in the form of the sonnet or any other type of ode or something like that. So that also lead to the misinterpretation or wrong interpretation of the text. So that was the effect of presupposition. Now we are going to talk about the ambiguous language. As we all know that poetry has always been filled with lot of images, allusions, connotations and annotations. So that ambiguous language also lead to the misinterpretation of the text. Now the last one was the use of theories. The students started putting some of the theories to those poems which also lead to the misinterpretation of the nature and also the value of the poem. So these were some of the obstacles that were being faced by the students, and I.A. Richard named this failure as a practical criticism. Then after that he taught the students that how to analyze the poem without knowing any historical background or without knowing any author's biography. And I would like to conclude my presentation by stating the objective of I.A. Richard. Objective of I.A. Richard was to encourage the students to concentrate on the words on the pages, and he asked them not to rely on the preconceived ideas about the text. So that was all about my side. Now Fatma will tell you about the 4 types of the meaning. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. So my name is Sadia Rashid and I will be talking about 4 types of meanings in understanding of any text. So in practical criticism, we mainly focus on the text and any external factors like the author's intention of writing any text and his historical backgrounds. We do not consider these factors. So according to I. Richard, language is made up of different words, and in order to understand any text, we need to know the meaning of individual words. And words are basically, the meaning of words basically constitute 4 aspects, which include sense, feelings, tone, and intention. So I'll be talking about the sense and feelings. And text basically communicate through the interplay of these 4 types of meanings. So first of all, we have sense. Sense is basically the plain literal meaning of any text, or it also constitutes the author's point of view. And in this case, if the author wants to have any attention by writing about anything, any experience or his state of mind, so we basically analyze that in it. And first, in order to understand the sense of any word or any text, first we need to understand to extract the meanings of it. And for this, any reader or critic has to read the text several times. Secondly, we have feelings. So feeling refers to emotions, our desires, pleasures, displeasures. In this, when writers talk about anything, any subject, they have some feelings towards any object or subject. So and we can relate it to our personal experiences as well, because when we say something or when we write about something, so we have certain feelings towards it. It might be positive, it might be negative. We might be we might be biased towards about that subject, or we might be unbiased towards that subject. And according to I. Richard, feeling is some personal flavor or coloring, the nouns of interest. And these 2 aspects of meaning of words, sense and feeling, these are interconnected to each other. In order to understand feeling, we need to understand the first aspect, which is the sense. And in case if we misunderstood the aspect of sense, we might misunderstand the feeling of intended feeling of the writer as well. So that was all from my side.
Assalamualaikum everyone, I am Fatma Tanveer and I will be discussing the points that are left here. 4 types of meaning, tone and intention. the sense and feelings. So when we analyze the text, we need to understand the meaning of it. And to understand the meaning, we work on these 4 points. Now the next point is tone and the next one is intention. Now what is tone? We need to understand what is tone. I. Richard explained that what is tone? Tone is the poet's or author's attitude towards his audience. Now when a author or writer writes something, he knows about his audience. He feels a connection or relation to his audience, and he feels that connection, and his connection determines the tone of the poem. Like what kind of words he's going to use in the poem or in the text. So tone refers to that thing. Now what is intention? Intention is to understand the intention. First we need to understand the sense, and then the feeling, and then the tone. Then we can understand the intention of the poem or the text or any text. And this intention, to apprehend the correct meaning of the text, we need to understand the intention. Now when we need to understand the intention, we can critically appreciate that text. So the author's intention and also the author's intention influences the language. Okay, I'll give you one example and then you will get the idea what is tone and intention. For example, in the previous semester when we read the Wordsworth poems, The Daffodils, I read few lines for you. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Now you read that stanza and you get the idea. Now you see the words are really simple. See, the words are really simple. Any person can understand these words. And when we are reading these poems, he said that beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing the breeze, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Now we get that he is working on his imagination and he is explaining about the nature, his emotions, his feelings, and his love for the nature. We understand that now, and from where we understand? From the words he uses that. So, and also, Wordsworth also said that in preface of Lyrical Ballad, he said that I write poetry to express my emotions and my feelings and for the love of the nature. So his point is that, and to to promote his ideas, he writes such kind of poetry. Okay. On the other hand, when we read the classical poetry, we read The Rape of the Lock, The Paradise Lost, and all these poems. We see that the words are really difficult. The vocabulary is difficult, and also when we read and what they explained there, they talked about gods and goddesses and myths of Greek mythology, right? You remember all? Yeah. So हम वहाँ से उनकी intention देखते हैं. What was their intention? The intention there was the moral purposes. They want to deliver the moral lessons, and that's why they are discussing about God and goddesses and myths. So I hope you get the idea about tone and intention. Okay, right? Now when we were preparing this presentation, a question came to my mind that we are reading practical criticism. Don't you think that this is a topic of literary criticism and this is a class of stylistics? Then why we are studying it here? Do you have? Yes, this is the same question.
Because stylistics deal with literary.
Yes, very good answer. Now there are 4 discourses: stylistics, linguistics, literary criticism, and discourse analysis. They all are interconnected. They have blurred boundaries and overlapping natures. So that's why we are discussing this. And when we stylistic is applied to the areas like literary criticism and discourse analysis. And when we analyze the text, we need the extensive knowledge of language. And where we get that extensive knowledge of language? From linguistics. And stylistic is a part of the linguistic. Okay? So this is all interconnected. To analyze a text, we need the knowledge of the language, and to read that knowledge of language, we need to study stylistics. So all these things are interconnected, the literary criticism, linguistic and stylistics. So that's why we are studying this. And also, when we read stylistics, we apply the graphological, syntactic features, lexicon, semantic features to the text, and then we apply these features to the text and analyze it. Also, sometimes the words also help us to grasp the idea that what is the genre, what is the communicative purpose of the author, right? So this is all connected. And also in the very first classes, Ma'am Sadia also explained that stylistic is a bridge between linguistics and literature. So that's why we are studying this in stylistics. I hope you all get the idea. And
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ikra Askar, and now I am going to discuss about the types of practical criticism. There are two types of practical criticism, that is the judicial criticism and impressionistic criticism. So the first one is judicial criticism. In this type of criticism, we actually evaluate the literary piece of work according to the general, according to some given rules and the standards. It means if any literary text that follows such classical standards, it means it is a good piece of literary work. But if it doesn't, it means that it is a bad and it is worthless. So this type of criticism was a dominant mode of criticism during the neoclassical and Renaissance era. As the neoclassical and Renaissance era was the era of objectivity, it was more focused on objective judgment. And the writer of that era wrote the poems, their literary piece of work according to by following the classical standards. For example, they wrote the literary work. They chose the subject. They chose the subject matter of their literary work according of universal themes. Like their subject matters were not. They were not free to choose their subject matter according to their own personal choices. Their themes were universal. They talked about the kings and queens, just like that. So, in contrast to judicial criticism, there is the impressionistic criticism. So, in this type of criticism, we evaluate any literary piece of work according to our own subjective impressions and reactions. So, it denies the objective judgment. This type of criticism was dominant during the Romantic era. The Romantic era was the era of subjectivity. The writers were free to choose the subject matter according to their own personal choices. But during 20th century, it was attacked because there was the emergence of new criticism, and the new critics considered it superficial and arbitrary. They said that it is erroneous, it is inaccurate to evaluate any literary text according to the psychological responses of the readers. And they called it as the affective fallacy, which means that to evaluate any literary work according to our own personal judgment. That's all from myself. Now, Stephanie will continue the features.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Hafsa and I'm going to discuss features of practical criticism. By emphasizing the literary text's evaluation and interpretation from the inside out and concentrating on how the readers could understand the text on its terms, practical criticism has long been distinguished from biographical, theoretical, textual, and historical criticism. Dryden's analysis of Ben Jonson's play The Silent Woman is one of the earliest examples of practical criticism. It exemplifies the dual purposes of most practical criticism. It clarifies the theoretical position held by the critic, and it also serves as a practical critique of the work in question. Contemporaries in the 17th and 18th centuries used the terms observations, reflections, or animadversions to describe critical pieces that focused on the shortcomings of the literary works. The critic highlighted authors' flaws line by line or page by page and making lengthy comments on them. The main goal was to show the author's lack of artistic control and weaknesses in knowledge, logic, and moral judgment. Joseph Edison modified practical criticism by promoting a more impartial method. He skillfully avoided discussions about the value of modern authors by concentrating on the beauties and faults of cherished masterpieces of English literature in his essay of English literature, The Spectator. The Edisonian critical method thereafter became the model for periodical practical criticism. Excuse me, ma'am, my name is Hafsa. On board it's written wrong, my name is Hafsa.
हफ्सा ठीक है हफ्सा वेट प्लीज
Assalamualaikum. I am going to present the importance of practical criticism. The main objective of practical criticism is to encourage the students to focus on the words on the page instead of predetermined beliefs about the text. Practical criticism aims to test our responses to the literary work by using our emotions rather than the writers. I.A. Richards in his book mentioned three aims of practical criticism. First, it introduces new kinds of documentation to those who are interested. Second, it provides a new technique for those who wish to discover for themselves what they think and feel about poetry. Thirdly, he wished to create a new and efficient way to help others understand what we hear and read without discrimination. So, practical criticism is the best and the most interesting way to interpret the poem. It helps reader to understand the literary text more clearly. That's all about our presentation. Thank you.
History of stylistics in the times of new criticism. So here there are two terms, stylistics and new criticism. We all know about stylistics, so I will not discuss it. But what is new criticism? New criticism is a literary theory that emerged in the United States in 1930s and 1940s. The basic idea of this theory is that a literary text should be analyzed and interpreted according to the intrinsic qualities of the text rather than the author's intentions or the historical and social context in which it was produced. It focuses on the internal coherence and the unity of the text. According to new criticism, a literary text should be analyzed by close reading. New critics were never a formal group, but the important inspiration was the teaching of John Crewell, whose students Alan Tate, Clint Brooks, Robert Penguin developed the aesthetics that came to be known as new criticism. New critics were inspired from the practical criticism of I.A. Richards that was already discussed by Group 1. Here the question arises that new criticism is a literary theory, then why we are studying here in the class of stylistics? Because stylistics and new criticism both are the approaches to the study of literature and both emphasize the importance of close analysis of literary language. There is a significant association between new criticism and stylistics, which will be further discussed by my group members. Thank you.
बेटा आपका नाम क्या है
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Iman Rashid and I'll discuss about John Crow Ransom and his role that in the development of new criticism and also and his role in basically in the development of stylistics as a separate academic field. He was an American critic, poet, and professor in the Kenyon College of Ohio, and he wrote a book in 1941 with the name The New Criticism. This book actually laid the basic foundations and principles for the field of new criticism. And he focused much more on style. Like we have heard the presentation of group 1, and there was no explicit use of the word style, but he explicitly used the word style, and he writes in his book that The New Criticism, page number 28, that style is the most important aspect of work of art, and then follows in page number 54 that style is the essential medium of literary expression. He argued that literary text should be studied as the self-contained works of art rather than the expressions of the author's personality or the reflections of the social or the historical backgrounds. He was basically a formalist. Formalist in the sense, we should not confuse it with the formal and informal, but we will take the word form, that he was a formalist, that he focused on the form. He was of the view that form is where, structure is where the meaning lies, and we should focus on the words on the page. And because of his work was mainly in the 1940s and followed by 50s. After his work, stylistics was established as a specific academic field in 1960s. He writes in his other book, which is The World's Body. It's his other book, where he states that a form in poetry is not merely the shell, but the kernel of the meaning. That form does not just gives the outer structure, but it also conveys the meaning. Thus, we should focus more on the style and the words written on the page. And now, this concept, Laba will further, she will clarify it.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Laba Maroof, and I will just elongate Eamon's point and tell you about how stylistics is related to new criticism. So when we talk about new criticism, there comes three great names: Ellen Tate, Robert Penn Warren, and Clint Brooks. They were actually the students of this John Crewe ransom, and they were also called as Southern critics because they were teaching at Southern universities when this new criticism came. And what did they do? They actually reacted against all those previous schools of criticism, for example, the Impressionist movement and liberal movements, nationalist movements, and they actually made new criticism as a separate discipline. And how did they apply it? First of all, they applied it to many genres in literature, but more specifically to poetry, because they thought poetry as a high form and as a best example to apply this new criticism. And Penn Warren and Ellen Tate, yeah, they defined literary aesthetics in relation to poetry in 1920s, and this is where, in 20th century, new criticism starts. And moreover, Clint Brooks, he was the one who stressed on close readings and structural analysis of literature instead of this historical or biographical analysis. And for Brooks, new criticism is that literary study should be concerned with the work itself instead of author's history or biography or any other perspectives. So how we can relate it to stylistics? Stylistics focus on language and form of the text. And this is what new critics are doing. They are taking the text as something more important and autonomous form of art rather than the author's history or biography. And they actually imply certain stylistic techniques. Now the word stylistics, they are again taking it from stylistics. For example, metaphor, irony, all those literary devices, they use it to analyze the text. So this is how this is related, stylistics is related to new criticism. That's all from my side.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Basima Nasir. I am going to continue the presentation, and I am going to introduce another literary figure who had a huge influence on stylistics and literary criticism during the 20th century, and he is none other than T.S. Eliot. I think we all are well familiar with him. We have read his literary criticism in the previous semester, and we are reading his poetry during this semester. So I'm going to discuss some, main points of his literary criticism, which paved the way for, this new criticism, and which had a huge influence on, the genre of stylistics. So the first and the main point which T.S. Eliot gave was that he was of the idea that a text should be studied in isolation, because a text is it's an autonomous thing, and it is self-contained. So it should be studied in isolation. We should not take take support from things, external factors like the author's biography or his era or any other external things. Rather, a text should be studied in isolation. In this point of his, it became foundation principle for new criticism. So it's said that that T.S. Eliot is considered, he himself is not considered as a new critic, but his work had huge influences on new criticism. And the second idea that he gave was, he introduced the idea of tradition in the English literature. He said that the most important part of a writer's work is the one which has been influenced by tradition. And he was the first person to point out this thing. And he said that this Western literature had a huge and it has a rich literary tradition. It starts from Aristotle, and then all those Greek and Roman writers, and then up till Shakespeare and beyond him. There were a lot of writers who just they created masterpieces which are of high literary quality. And he said that a writer's work should be compared to their work, the standard works, and a text should be judged by the standards of the past. So he introduced another, we can say that he introduced another factor in stylistics, that was tradition, that we can judge a text or a piece of writing through this criteria as well. So we are familiar with this thing, that he gave this technique called the touchstone method, in which he said that texts should be compared with standard texts from the past, and they should be judged in that way. And his another point was that he opposed emotional appreciations of text. He said that we should not analyze a text in a way that's emotional, that is appealing to emotion. He said that it should rather be technical, right? And we should first identify those technical and formal elements of the text, and then we should judge it on the basis of their things. And he also ruled out those techniques like affective fallacy and intentional fallacy. And the last thing that he said was that, which is important in regard to this topic, is that he said that when we read a text, it evokes some emotions in us, right? He said that we should not seek those emotions in the we should seek those emotions in the text instead of seeking those emotions in the life of the author, or in his history or his era. Like sometimes when we read poetry, we are we then go to the biography of the author, and then we say that, oh, he was living this kind of life, that's why he's writing this kind of sad things. But that's not the right way. We should seek the emotions inside the text rather than going for external things. So now Hadia will come and she will discuss some.
I'm Hafiz Adil. As Muslimat told you, I will continue. So first of all, T.S. Eliot, he established some stylistic features that he thought were essential for a good text. So those stylistic features include, number first is influence from tradition. that a text should contain an influence from its tradition. The second one is unity. So there should be a unity in themes, sub-themes, and structure of the text. So for example, if we see the modern or postmodern poets, so we can see in their poetry the fragmentation. So why there is fragmentation in their poetry? Because they belong to such a society which is fragmented. The thoughts of people are fragmented, so it has effect on their poetry, that their poetry has irregular rhyme scheme, and so usually they use blank verse in their poetry. So the third thing is ambivalence. So in this poet, he is simultaneous. He has the feelings towards simultaneous feelings towards any subject or person or any kind of idea. The other thing is ambiguity. So in a word, phrase, sentence, or there are some ideas which we can understood in more than one way. So they are unclear. The fifth one is tension. So if there is misery in the text, so there are such words are used or such sentences are used that evokes the fear and stress of the reader. The sixth one is irony. Irony is when the writer says something that is contradictory to our expectation. And the last one is paradox. Paradox is also a statement that is opposite to the expectation of a reader, but later on it makes sense. So these are the 7 stylistic features that are important for a good text. Next, he gave the idea of objective correlative. So he gave the idea of objective correlative in his essay Hamlet and His Problems, in which he discussed that there is a connection between words of text and terms, between states of mind and experiences. For example, if we have a tragic text, if we have tragedy, so in that we have such kind of words that express gloominess and sadness of their text. So those words can be darkness and rain, etc. And the last point is disinterestedness. So Eliot believes that one should be completely disinterested while critically analyzing a text. So a reader should not impose his own ideologies to that text. So the disinterestedness or impartiality is very much important while analyzing the text. So that's all from my point.
I shall be giving an example at how, by utilizing some of the tactics of new criticism and the rules of stylistic, we can actually analyze a poem without digging into the history of the poet or the poem. So for this purpose, our focus must be on the formal elements. What are the formal elements? Formal elements are basically the elements that are provided by the language of a text. Like you have metaphor, you have similes, you have imagery, rhyme, rhythm. These all elements are collectively known as formal. Good. Now there is a poem that states there is a girl inside. If we just focus on the first few words of stanza number 1 and we align them with the last words of stanza 1, we get an idea that there is a girl inside an old woman. So this implies that maybe the speaker is an old woman, or maybe the conflict is between the old age and youth, or maybe the conflict is between the physical appearance of a person and internal feelings. So there are some words that are symbolic and they are adding into the theme of the poem, like the use of words like green tree, green girl, or the grey hair. So green color, it symbolizes youth, and the grey hair, it symbolizes the old age. So these words are symbolic, and how these are symbolic, Fatma will explain that, but
Now in the poem, we see that the fluctuation of the use of words regarding the old age and the youth. It ends with the fourth line, stanza number 3. And in the last stanza, there is a theme of timeless youth. Because there are such words like lovers, harvest, and honey. These words are really symbolic, and they are symbolizing the fertility, sexuality, and enjoyments of life. It is telling us that what is subsidiary and what gains the precedence. There is a saying that being old is not an age, it's a decision. And it's my saying, you can forget about it. Okay, now this was the first aspect of the poem, and the second aspect of the poem is about the punctuation. If you just focus on the stanza number 1 and stanza number 2, it is arranged in a very witty manner. In the stanza number 1 and 2, there are 5 number of full stops. But as we move ahead, the number of full stops are decreasing. So this sudden decrease in the use of full stop, it indicates that there is more commotion, more mobility. Where there is mobility, there is flexibility. Where there is flexibility, there is enjoyment and youth. So this is how, by just focusing on the words and by relying on the surface structure, we can dig into the deep meaning of the things. Or we can say that by just relying on the elements that are presented before us on the stage, and without peeping out what is happening behind the scene, we can extract the meaning out of the things. So these were the 2 aspects from my side, and the third aspect is about the use of metaphors, and Fatima is going to explain that.
Assalamualaikum class, my name is Fatima Sirha, and today I will explain the metaphorical importance of this poem. So first of all, look at the first stanza of this poem. The first line indicates there is a young girl in this poem. Inside the old woman. This means the narrator of this poem is an old woman who wants to be young again, who wants to enjoy his youth again. So, if we look at the metaphors used for the young girl, we can see that the poet has used green tree, green girl,
Grey hair,
and blossom for the young girl. These metaphors are used for the young girl who is inside the old woman, and the metaphors used for the old woman are the bones. Grey hair and kindling wood. Yes, kindling. So all these metaphors are for the old woman. So we can see that there is a tension between a young girl and an old woman. So who wants to become a young girl again. Then, if we look at the nun, at the word nun, so we can see that nun is the bridge between young girl and an old woman who is in state of like a nun who is from part of the society and wants to regain her again youthfulness and mobility and everything that she was enjoying the young age. Then looking at the other metaphors used in this poem, we can see that the poet has used metaphors like kindling. Kindling is a wood that is used to ignite fire, and this shows that this has an ambiguity of meaning. Like wood, this wood is used to ignite fire, but randomly it catches fire. So this means that this is for old woman, but the compassion of this fire can be associated with the young woman. So this metaphor has an ambiguity in its meaning. It can be referred to both old woman and to the young woman. Then another word, honey, thyme, and harvest. All of these have ambiguity in their meaning. So for example, harvest, we harvest a crop when it is plant when it is ripe and mature. We do not harvest it when it is green tree. We cannot harvest a plant when it is green. Then on the other hand, honey, we extract the honey from when the bees make it from the pollen grains of the flowers, and then make it in the beehives, and then we collect the honey from the beehives. It is also when it is mature. We collect it when it gets mature. Similarly, thyme is a herb. We use it as a a fragrant, it is a fragrant herb, and we use it when it becomes dry, and we use it in medication purposes and for the beauty items, etc. So there is ambiguity in the meanings of honey, thyme, harvest, and pinning. They shows both young age and old age. So we can see that the tension in this poem is between young girl and the old woman. So by analyzing that, looking at the metaphors of this poem, we can easily analyze, we can easily look at the theme and tone and the tension and conflict of this one. So in this way, by looking at the surface structure and looking at only the words on the page, we can analyze a poem instead of getting the background of the poet or poem or the historical background, who wrote this poem and why she wrote or why he wrote this poem. We don't even know who is the author, who is the writer, is he male or female, but we know that the speaker of this poem is an old woman who wants to become a young girl, and this is we can analyze this way.
मैम मैं पहले भी इसीलिए लेट हो गई
Hello everyone, my name is Sadia and today I will present on Russian formalism. It's a school of literary criticism which is originated in Moscow basically, and it was flourished in 1920s and the former of this school was Soviet Union, and it's only focused on the form of any literary text, it has the similar idea of neo-criticism and practical criticism, where the writer or the reader perceive any text without going on any ideology or any historical background of any writer. It has two groups, which is responsible for any rhetorical development. The first one is the Moscow Linguistic Circle, which is founded in 1915, and the leader was Roman Jakobson, and the second group is called the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, which is founded in 1916, and it's led by Viktor Tchaikovsky. And the other points, Rabia will explain it. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Myself. Assalamu alaikum. Myself, Rabia Shpa, and I shall be continuing the same topic, Russian formalism, and I'm here with the basic ideology of Russian formalism. Okay, as the name implies, formalism. In formalism, basically we take form as a source of meaning. We draw the meaning of the text keeping the form in mind, right? So, in order to draw the meaning from the text, we always have the two approach. The first is the contextual meaning. The second one is when we take text in order to draw the meanings, right? When we take the words in order to draw the meanings. For contextual meanings, we do have the context. In which context the text came into being. For example, there shall be the historical, social, economical, religion backgrounds we can have in there. Then if we talk about the author, we have the biography, autobiography of the author, right? So all these things influence the contextual meaning that we draw from the text. The second one, on which the Russian formalist was more focused on, is drawing the meanings from the words. And not only the words, because if we just take the words, they dig more into it and take it to the form, right? Text the word, word say form. Actually. Okay. Then if we talk about some very key principles of Russian formalism, so the first thing that they talk about is the aesthetic beauty. Okay, what is aesthetic beauty? You know, for example,
example, when we practice creative writing, right? So what do? We have to take certain things in the mind. There are words. How do we choose the words? How do we arrange them? How do we make a sentence out of them, right? And again, we do have, if we talk about the plot, we talk about the settings, we talk about the characterization, they all come under the aesthetic beauty that the text gives us, right? The appeal that the text gives us. Then the focus on form. Okay, form is itself a content. We cannot separate form from the content, right? So Russian formalism, they remain focused towards the fact that content of the text is not separate from its form. They two are the same things, right? Then again, the text focused. See, no historical, biographical or autobiographical context is important. Text for text's sake, art for art's sake, right? So this thing is most repeated thing in the Russian formalism. Then text on its own terms. For example, see, they say that text is independent entity, right? Having its own terms and conditions, right? When they particularly talks about the text. Then literariness. For example, you must have seen that we do have the books. We do have books on physics, chemistry, biology, social science, biology and philosophy, right? But they are not the literary text. What gives that, how the writer puts the soul of literariness into the text, right? For that we have the poetic language. For example, if we are creating some literary piece, we shall not be using the ordinary words that how we talk to each other, right? We shall not be having those words into it. So the poetic language, it is very much different from the language that we use in our daily usage. That is in our daily usage. Then we have the defamiliarization. If you know Samuel Taylor Coleridge, right? So if you remember his words, that most of the people, he comment on his poetry that he make the familiar things disfamiliar, right? Defamiliar. So actually the defamiliarization of concept is just same, okay, not very different. Then how writers, they make things that are very much familiar to us, they appear to be defamiliar. Why? Because their usage of words, their sentence constructions, that how they deliver the idea, and again the usage of the stylistic devices into it, right? Then we have the text is made up of stylistic devices, right? The formal devices. Okay, again it has the metaphor, the similes, the irony, symbolization, everything, imagery, okay, everything comes under that. Then we have the concept of fabula and sujet. I'm sorry if I pronounce it right. Sujet. Okay. Fabula is just a story, okay, any narration, right? And but when we talk about the sujet, it is actually that having a plot. Plot is the soul of a narration, right? Having a proper starting, a proper beginning, having a proper middle and a proper end. And how the writer arranges all of those things, how artistically he arranges all that, it gives the aesthetic beauty, right? These all components are not separate from each other. Why? Because these all components get concluded at the point that is the close reading. Okay, so Russian formalism, they keep on dragging the readers towards the close reading, where he divorces all the other things, where he where he do not consider the contextual information, he do not consider the author, the biography of him, or any social, political, religious elements, right? When he takes the text for its own sake, when he takes the art for art's sake, right? I hope it's all clear. If you have any question, you can ask afterwards. So I'll invite the other member of my group to make you this concept clear, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Stylistics and today I will explain that how Russian formalism has contributed into the subject or into the field of literary theory in different ways. First of all, I would say that as they have more focused on the formal aspects of text, they focus more on the form than content. They focus more on the language than exforas, like the biographical and historical details. So I would say that they have, they developed a notion that a text can be analyzed by its own features, like its own narrative techniques, or by its you can say that schemes and tropes and imagery and the things like that. Furthermore, I would say that they developed a technique of defamiliarization or estrangement. This is a term by Victor Shklovsky, and according to this term, the Russian formalists believe that a language can make a familiar unfamiliar. A language can present a familiar thing in an unfamiliar ways. So they developed a more kind of subjective reading to a text, and this very thing has contributed into the concept of literariness, which means that literature is a distinct language with its own features and conventions, and this thing challenged the conventional modes of interpretation of text. For example, when we talk about a text, a literary text from belong to an era of romanticism, we automatically think that a text from a romantic moment would be grounded on the basic theme of nature with its different treatments. Like the authors would have treated nature differently according to their own impersonal personal experiences. So we say that in this way we develop a kind of biased approach to our text, right? So the concept of literariness basically give us a technique that this is a basic criteria that makes an ordinary text that makes a literary text different from an ordinary text, and these challenge the conventional modes of interpretation in this way that a text can be analyzed by its own features. And Russian formalism basically contributed into this many other schools of literary analysis, literary theory, like structuralism, like reader response theory and semiotics, and in this way it has contributed into the subject of literary theory and criticism. Even presently we analyze literary text by the notions belong to the Russian formalism movement. So in this way it has contributed into the subject of literary theory.
Assalamu alaikum, myself Hira Liaquat, and I will discuss Roman Jakobson and his contribution in Russian formalism. He was a Russian-American linguist and literary theorist. As Sadia has mentioned that he belongs to Moscow's literary circle, and he mainly claimed that the use of linguistic devices such as tone, metaphor, simile, parallelism, ambiguity differentiate ordinary language from poetic devices. He further describes 6 functions of language that are emotive, to use to show emotions, referential, to show references, poetic, to express emotions and feelings, fatigue, the purpose of language, and the 5th one is metalingual, with which language is used, mainly the quality of language, and the last one is cognitive, which is related to context. As Rabia has mentioned, the poetic function of language, his main contribution is that in 1960 he says that the poetic function of literary text, that the use of certain linguistic choices draw attention to the language of the text. Mainly, in short, we can say that by the use of figurative language devices, we can differentiate the ordinary text from, we can make an ordinary language to an extraordinary. That's all from my side. Salima, please present.
everyone, Salima. Today I'm going to present the theory of Uritinov in Russian formalism. Hi, right. Uritinov's position as a key figure in the Russian formalist movement is undisputed. Tenninov made some important contributions to development of this dynamic theory of literature evolution. The first was to clarify the role of parody as an agent of change. Tenninov thought that parody is thus a catalyst of literary change, which accelerates the evolution of forms by automatizing outward devices while simultaneously promoting a new organization of material. This conception of the dual effect, destructive and reconstructive of parody. Tenninov in each case calls attention to the coexistence of past, present, and future elements, and the critical fact system is constantly changing. In other respects, Tenninov's notion of system close with Saussure's notion. Number one, a relational concept which sees the elements of a literary work or genre as interlinked or interdependent. Number two, a differential concept which sees literature as a system of differences. Number three, a hierarchical concept which sees the elements of system as unequally valued.
This is Roshan, and I am going to present the contribution of Boris Akenbaum in Russian formalism. He is one of the leading figures of Russian formalist school of literary criticism.
Okay, we can continue later then.
One of the leading figures of Russian formalist school of literature and his contribution in Russian formalism. As discussed earlier by our other group members, that Russian formalism is one of the is a school of literary criticism. They discussed the idea of forms and the difference in different forms and contribution of different theorists in Russian formalism. So here Boris Akenbaum is one of is a Russian theorist. He is also a critic and theorist, and he represents Russian formalism. He studied philology that deals with the structure and history of language. One of his most notable work in Russian formalism is theory of formal matter, in which he defended Russian formalism from the revolutionary thinker. He systematizes the formalist principle to set up a theory, and in Russian formalism what he did is he made formalism a scientific theory, because according to him, and independent and factual methods are needed. Factual methods are required for
because according to Boris Eckenberg, an independent and factual methods are required for the science of literature. And by independent, he means to say that an art should be free and independent from the traditional conventions and norms, and it should be based on facts. He says that Russian formalism is not a dogmatic thing, but rather it is a historical summations, and that's why he merges history and he merges theory and history for formalism. He says that rather than revolving the issues of form versus content, the formalist intended to reframe it into a new form. He made a new form of literature, and he believes in destroying the traditional conventions and norms because he says that it enriches the idea of form with a new significance. So he says that he believes in that we should avoid the traditional conventions and norms, and it means that he believes in deviation in the text. So he says that an artist should be free and independent of any traditional convention and norm while creating an art. So this was the contribution of Boris Eckenberg, and Usman will continue.
I am Muska, and I'll explain and I'll tell you the role of John Mukarovsky in the Russian formalism. John Mukarovsky was a Czech literary theorist and linguist. So Czech is not, it can be pronounced as Czech, but its spelling is Czech. Basically, he was a practitioner of Russian formalism. Actually, he was also a mediator between Russian formalism and Prague linguistic circle. Prague linguistic circle was a circle of linguists and theorists in Czechoslovakia who were interested in the study and the relation between literature and language. John Mukarovsky actually provided the analysis and proved that there is some relation between language and literature. His basic role and his basic important contribution to the Russian formalism was the theory of literary structure, not the structuralism theory. This was the theory of literary structure. Theory of literary structure, basically what is the theory of literary structure? It focuses on the devices, the literary languages, the literary devices used in a text, in a literary work, so that it can typify poetic language. It tells that it opposed straightforward quotidian language. It only focused on poetic language. Poetic language means emotional language, feelingful language. This theory provided the way for further analysis. It eased the analysis of Prague linguistic circle. This theory also, John Mukarovsky also said that every fragment of literary work tells you some reality, shows you some context, tells you about the history. The literary work is not just a piece of work. Every piece has a context, every piece has a background story. Okay, this theory had a significant impact on the development of literary theory in 20th century. It paved the way for Russian formalism. This is not basically Russian formalism. He practiced Russian formalism. He just paved the way for that linguists for making relation between literature and language. His work helped to establish the important formal analysis in literary criticism aside and provided new framework for understanding the relation between literature, language, as well as society. This was all from my side. Next, Farzana will analyze the text.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Farzana Ghaffar and I'm going to speak on on behalf of my group on Russian formalism. As all of the members of my group have discussed almost everything related to Russian formalism, now I'm going to apply all the key concepts of Russian formalism on a literary text. The literary text which I have chosen for analysis is the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And as we have all read this poem in our poetry subject recently, so it would be very easy for you to grasp the basic idea. Now, if I proceed towards the key concepts, the very first concept of Russian formalism is the idea of foregrounding, which means idea of drawing attention towards the formal aspects of literary text. If I particularly talk about this poem, the formal elements, this poem is rich in formal elements, as it has meter, it has rhyme scheme, and it has imagery. And all these formal elements invites the reader to engage with them in a very meaningful way. Now, if I talk about the other key concept of Russian formalism, defamiliarization, as my member of the group discussed defamiliarization yesterday also, and she talked about that defamiliarization is the process in which the poet or the author takes the familiar objects and he presents them in the very new and unfamiliar way. So if I talk about this poem, there are two lines in this poem. The yellow fog rubs upon window panes, the yellow smoke muzzles on the window panes. Now, the two objects, we are very much familiar with these things. The yellow fog, we know what is yellow smoke, but the poet has used personification and he has personified these objects in what? In yellow lazy cat, which is very unfamiliar, you know. We cannot associate anything between them. So there may be several reasons for this personification. Maybe this personification was more aesthetic towards poet or any other thing. Now, if I talk about the poetic function, this is another key concept of Russian formalism, that is poetic function, which means the use of language for its own sake, not for the sake of communication. Now, if I talk about this poem has complex syntax, and it has so many allusions, as we have read recently, and it has so many literary references, which do not have any, they are not associated with particular theme or message, but they only create a sense, an aesthetic sense or a depth in this poem. So this is how we can analyze a literary text, by applying these concepts of Russian formalism. This was from my side. I hope you got the idea of Russian formalism. Thank you so much.
This is group 4.
I'll be presenting its origins and the definition by a couple of theorists, linguists, and my group will carry on with its devices, and finally we'll conclude with some. So, while origins may make it seem like there's a whole lecture on history in front of you, stylistics is a comparatively new discipline itself. So we don't have to go back centuries to find the traces of where the foregrounding theory began. In the early 20th century, Viktor Shklovsky from the Russian formalists gave his defamiliarization theory in his essay Art as Technique in 1917. According to that theory, the function of art is to defamiliarize its readers, its audience, from concepts that are familiar to them, so that they can see them in a new light, they can perceive them from a different perspective. On his work, two Prague school structuralists, Bohuslav Havanik and John Pokrovsky, built their own theories. They both wrote in 1932 their respective essays, the functional differentiation of the standard language and the standard language and poetic language. And they actually use the word actualizace. Actualizace, which can be translated into actualization. So while Bohuslav Havanik defined it as the use of devices of the language in such a way that this use itself attracts attention and is perceived as uncommon, as deprived of automatization, as de-automized. Jan Makarowski defined it as the opposite of automatization. Right? But how do we get to programming now? Well, in 1964, P.L. Graven published his book, A Prague School Reader on Aesthetics, Literary Structure and Style. In that book, he included the translation of these two essays, and he is the first one to use the word foregrounding for this concept. Right? This was then developed by M.A.K. Halliday, a very famous English linguist. Who characterizes it as motivated prominence, and defines it as the phenomena of linguistic highlighting, whereby some features of the language of a text stand out in some way. So, in the modern day, we have linguists like Paul Simpson, who define it as a form of textual patterning in which is motivated specifically for literary aesthetic purposes. Now, this foregrounding, it can be found in every level of language: phonological, lexicogrammatical, semantic, and it basically happens in two. It has basically two classifications of devices: parallelism and deviation. Their whole further classification in the levels of language will be discussed by my group members. That's what
Okay. Well, my name is Khadija Bilkis and I'm going to present on behalf of group number 4. While this all might seem a bit too much to take in, this foregrounding theory is actually really simple. It's something that we've been doing since the moment we stepped into English degree and started studying literature on any level. Like be it poetry, or when we studied Carlyle's essays and Matt Komal made us do all that stylistic analysis, or when we studied poetry last semester, or when Miriam taught us Paradise Lost. We've been doing it for our whole degree, but we just don't know that it was foregrounding theory or there were levels to it or what was it. Now to talk about foregrounding theory, it's basically when we use the means of repetition to actually introduce patterns into the text which actually are manipulating us mentally to help us extract some sort of meaning from the text. For instance, when Ma'am Komal taught us Carlyle's essays, she was the repetition of the letter B. She was like, this stands for this. And when we were studying Paradise Lost, there was about knowledge, and she was like, it has 9 letters, and then it's related to apple, and then all that forbidden, and she related all that, right? That is just this foregrounding theory. Now, parallelism Leach defines it as it's the introduction of extra regularities, not irregularities, into the language. Like when the writer is writing something, he introduced some patterns into that text. And now we're going to study those patterns on 4 levels: phonological, semantic, lexical, and grammatical. I'm going to be discussing phonological and semantic. Now phonological, as we can see, it's from phonemes, right? We know all the basic sound structures, right? And when we say phonological parallelism, we mean that the writer has used phonemes to introduce some pattern into the text. I've taken this part from the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It says, the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free, we were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. Right? If we analyze this according to phonological parallelism, then we can see that there's alliteration, first of all: the fair, the foam, the flew, the followed, the free, the furrow, the first, right? And then we have here too, breeze blew, and then silent sea. This is all alliteration, right? That we have been studying for so long. This is phonological parallelism. It can also be seen in terms of rhyming. we have flew, we have free and see, we have first and burst, we have blue and flew. This is alliteration and this is rhyme, and this is basically phonological parallelism. Now we have studied alliteration, we have studied rhyme, we have studied rhyming. This is also included in terms of consonants and assonance, when there's a repetition of vowel sounds or when there's a repetition of consonant sounds. We can also observe that here, like if we see e's, e, and then if there's a lot of R sound in the middle, like furrow and fair and free, then that R sound that is in the middle, that is assonance, right? That is consonants. And this is basically phonological parallelism. We see alliteration, rhyming, consonants, assonance, and like the rhythm of the poetry. And then if we look at semantic parallelism, unlike phonological parallelism, that is something that is a bit material, semantic parallelism is a bit more abstract. We can see that in terms of the meaning that is foregrounding, a meaning is foregrounded in the text. Like, it is not, the words are not repeated, the sounds are not repeated, nothing is repeated, the meaning is repeated. Our perception of it is influenced. For instance, we just studied T.S. Eliot, we're still studying T.S. Eliot, and he says, do you know nothing, do you see nothing, do you remember nothing? Now the word nothing is, it is being repeated, but that is not the point. The point here is that remember, see, and know. Our concern is with this. He's just, in all these three sentences, he's questioning the knowledge of the person he's addressing, right? So, in this way, the meaning is foregrounded in the text. If someone says, okay, she's my best friend, she's my companion, like all these words are meaning the same thing. The words are different, but through the meaning, the writer is foregrounding what he means to convey. This was an example of synonyms when the meanings of the words are similar. We also have examples of antonyms when the meaning is different. From Alexander Pope, I've taken this example: to err is human, to forgive divine. Now we can see err and forgive. They're both antonyms, human and divine. Those are both antonyms too. He has contrasted two separate ideas to bring them out. He's used like to err is human, to forgive divine, and since both are the exact opposites of each other, so it makes more impact on the reader. Then it is also, I can also get in form of hyponyms. Hyponyms, if I say the garden was filled with flowers, and then I say the roses were red and the lilies were swaying. Then hyponyms is when there's a larger there's a big word, and then in that category there are several other words, right? So if I say that, then it's going to be flower, because roses and lilies are both flowers, right? So then again it's going to be foregrounding that meaning. Now the next grammatical and lexical is going to be done by
My name is Maria and I will discuss grammatical parallelism and lexical parallelism. This type of parallelism is also known as syntactic parallelism. Reference and widely state that grammatical parallelism is a significant form of structural repetition in which a syntactic structure is repeated or placed parallel. For example, in this phrase, we can see the same syntactic structure. That is, a pronoun is followed by a verb. In this phrase, I is being followed by a verb, three different verbs, that is, leave, love, and love. And these three of them start with the sound l. So there is also alliteration. Another example we have from the short story of Nine Talisman. The title of the story is Living with Contradictions. He didn't want to fight in any war, and she didn't want to have a child. So here we can see the repetition of the phrase didn't want to. In these both classes, the repetition of the phrase didn't want to it's therefore to contrast the priorities of the two different characters. And they are basically
refusing to accept the social norms and deviate from what is expected from them. So in this way, Tillman has incorporated the title deep in her story. Another form of parallelism is lexical parallelism. It's used to denote the repetition of lexical items. The difference between grammatical and lexical parallelism is that in lexical parallelism, the recurrent lexical items or their equivalent need not have the same syntactic function. For example, in this sentence, the report was meant to be studied quickly, thoroughly, and accurately. We can see the repetition of the repetition of lexical items. That is quickly, thoroughly, and accurately. Another example is the tagline of the Wayne's World. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you'll hurt. So here we can see both the repetition of syntactic structure and the repetition of lexical item. So in this sentence there is both grammatical parallelism and lexical parallelism. That was all from my side. Now over to
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Urwasa and I'm going to talk about deviation. So we have two definitions of deviation. Yeah, you can see the word deviation is itself definitive. Deviation means to deviate or to go the other way. So Richards defined deviation, that term used to describe any pronunciation, word or sentence structure which does not conform to a norm. Norm is basically standard practice in speech and writing. It means that if there is some standard form of writing and I am a writer and I want to write something new and I will write in a new way, then it will be a deviation. It will be the deviation in literary text. Geoffrey and Leach defines in his book A Linguistic Guide to English Poetry, he says, deviation is necessity to produce an artistic work. Deviation is necessity to produce an artistic work. By this he means that a poet can exceed the language limits to investigate new experiences and effects through the choice of words and to invent new techniques to impress his readers. And this term was originally coined by Geoffrey and Leach in 1969, and Geoffrey and Leach defines 9 types of deviation, and I'm going to tell you about the lexical deviation. So lexical deviation, the word lexical defines itself. It means it is something related to the words. So we define lexical deviation that when words depart from their normal standard or when words are invented in a process called neologism or nonce formation. So neologism is when words are invented or accidentally or cautiously by the speaker. So this process is neologism. And writers use lexical deviation to create deeper meaning, aesthetic value, to achieve certain stylistic effect or to meet need for a single occasion in the literary text. Let me tell you the example of neologism. In T.S. Eliot in his poem Wasteland uses this technique. He says, and ITIDCs have four suffered all. And ITIDCs have four suffered all. Focus on this word for. Morphological rules permit the use of for with verbs like foresee, foretell, foreknown, but T.S. Eliot have used this lexical deviation, and he uses this word for with a totally new word that is suffered. So this is neologism. And lexical deviation also occurs in the form of repetition. Thomas Hood, let me tell you an example of Thomas Hood poem. He repeated the word work in his poem total 27 times in 5 stanzas. He says, work, work, work till the brain begins to swim. Work, work, work till the eyes are heavy and dim. You can see he repeated this word work 6 times. Yes, 6 times in these 4 lines. So we say that in lexical deviation, repetition is also used, and we mostly say this repetition in the form of anaphora, which is a literary device. That's all from my side. Thank you.
My name is Zainab, and I'll be discussing semantic deviation and syntactic deviation. So we're going to start with syntactic deviation. From the word syntactic, we mean by that is the grammar of whatever the poet or writer means. So, writers and poets, they got some kind of advantage or favor rather than us. Like, they can switch the order of each sentence, or like we know the subject, verb, and object, yeah. But for them, they can switch between them. So you can see over here a clamping called figure they. There's no verb in this sentence, but yet for poets or writers, for them it is a complete sentence. They can really understand it. And over here, our sons, their father's failing language. So next is semantic deviation. So semantic is basically the meaning of any sentence, yeah? So for them, they can surely say any word that's from their background knowledge or their culture or their personal life. They can, but we cannot as a normal people. So for example, so I'm not yet born. Excuse me. Oh, hear me. So over here we see that a child is speaking. So is it possible a child who is not born yet is speaking? No, it's not possible. But for them it is possible. Now when you read their poetry, you will understand that the child is seeking out the other people that please help me from the horror of modern era or people. And if you're not going to help me, then I don't want to be born. So that's it. That's my answer.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Yusra, and today I'm going to present a phonological deviation and a morphological deviation. So, phonological deviation, first of all, I will ask you guys, what do you think? What is phonological? Yeah. Okay, so phonology is basically a branch of linguistic, and in which we talk about how do we produce sounds. And for example, if I'm speaking or I'm using English language, how I am speaking certain words and what kind of speech sounds I am making. Okay, so when we have to talk about phonological deviation, there will be inadequate use of phonological rules of language due to linguistic disorganization. For example, in English language, it is told to us like this is the word and this is the rule of using it, okay? Or how we pronounce it. For example, and if we didn't pronounce it in the base of English, like the English language, so it's incorrect. Okay, so I will just give you an example. Here are two examples. I don't know all of you will see it or not, but yeah. Here he said that up dot started you kid, said Bernie, who was the attended sprite, but I will indicure. Okay, it's like when we read it, it's completely wrong. Like it doesn't make sense. Okay, so and this is the phonological deviation. Okay, so what he wanted to say in this example, I docked, it's I am, because he cannot pronounce N and M, okay, and he replaced it with D and B. So here he said IB dot created certed you cat. It's completely wrong. So here it's like I'm not. And created, it's certain, okay? You cat, it's you can. So, said Bernie, who was the attended sprite, but I will inquire. It is the right one. This is the first example. The second example is from the country, but something in your way or of mistake. It's completely wrong and it doesn't make any sense. So the right sentence is like for now. Just 1 minute. Where is it? Yeah. It is for from. The first one is for from, and the second words it's something, okay, and I am. So let's move on to the morphological deviation. Okay, so morphological deviation. Morphological deviation is from morph. Okay, so morphology is basically a branch of linguistics which is concerned with the rules of making words. I mean, it tells how you make words in English and what are the rules we need to follow for that. And a small example, okay? Here in the poem of, ma'am, can you read it?
Adonis.
Okay. In the poem of Adonis by P.B. Shelley, he wrote this in his poem. From whom should she have walked the swollen year? This airs and streams renew their joyous tone. Invulnerable nothings. We decay. So, from whom should she have walked the swollen year? When we read the first stanza, did you notice any mistake in this stanza? Any word, anything? Okay. So it's not wrong. I mean, but yeah, walked. Here he wrote walked. Okay, so the third form we write woken, not walked. So here we can see the morphological deviation. Okay, so the ears and streams renew their joyous tone. Here he used ears like we can't use ears with S. Okay, and nothing. When someone asks us, like, how are you doing? We say nothing much. We didn't say nothing with S, right? So here it is, morphological deviation. And that's it.
तो क्या नाम है आपका? परखा जी, परखा.
Graphological deviation is basically the violation of legible academic writing. Writers of poets usually use graphological deviation by not using full stops or punctuation marks and capitalization in their writings. We can see graphological deviation in Eliot's lines. The right time and the right place are not here. No place of grace for those who avoid the feast, no time to rejoice for those who walk among. Here we can see that Eliot does not use any punctuation marks, full stop, etc. So it's graphological deviation, and it's done to make the writing more aesthetic or elevative. Moving on to historical deviation, it's basically the use of archaic words, old-fashioned language that is not in our everyday life. Language. Here we can see the speech of Kennedy, President Kennedy. Let the words go forth to friend and foe alike. Here the words forth and foe are from archaic language. Forth means forward and foe means enemy. So the use of such words is called historical deviation.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Anna and I am going to explain these two deviations, the dialectical deviation and the register deviation, right? So what is deviation? Deviation is a distortion in the use of a standard language, right? So from the name, dialectical deviation, it means there is a deviation in the standard language that is used by the dialects actually. The dialects which are used by the people, local people in the society, right? So what is the dialect? Dialect is something that is a mother tongue, right? Mother tongue is used by a certain group of people and they pronounce certain words according to their how their mother used to pronounce these words in the society around them, right? So this is deviation from the standard language. For example, in the prose of Dickens' Oliver Twist, that's accused, they damned the straw. Like here, the word accuse, he writes it as accused. It is not accused, it is because. And he writes it accordingly, right? And the other words is chimney. It's not chimney, it's chimney. So his dialect is different from that of the standard language and he used those words according to himself, right? So another word is sense and it is sense, not sense. This is M, he write it as M, but it is not M, it is them. So how this language is changed according to the dialect is something that is dialectal deviation. Okay, and the other one is register deviation. What is register? Register is the use of a language by a certain group of people in different situations, in different contexts, right? So how we will explain it, like language used by a particular group of people who share the same occupation, interest or social situations. For example, in the a letter written by Auden, letter is written by a letter written by Auden to Lord Byron. In his letter, he wrote about and many a bandit not so gently born kills worming every winter with the corn. Like no one knows what is corn, and it is the substitute of meat, right? So he used this word here to his friend, and he and his friend knows what is corn. If I give you the common example, like my mother used to say the brown dal, which is we used to say brown masar. She says like urad, and no one in the like Rawalpindi, no one knows what is urad. So this is the specific word that is used by in Sindh and not in East Punjab.
right? So how these registers are only known to the people who use them, right? So this is how he used corn instead of meat, which is a substitute of meat, and his friend knows. So this is the registered deviation, and this is the dialectal deviation. That's all.
My name is Kamal Javed and I will talk about criticism on foregrounding theory. First, we should know the purpose of criticism, why we are talking about this. The purpose of criticism is to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of any theory and we can know its applicability. By examining foregrounding theory, we can know its limits and areas where it may be less effective. So, several critics have brought a few issues. I will discuss 3 issues. The first issue is highly subjective theory. This theory is highly subjective in nature and every reader has their own interpretation.
Okay, beta, wait please. I'll be back. 2 minutes, okay? Sorry. Sorry, Okay, after this group, I'm sorry that the last group cannot present because Dr. Saima needs your class early. So right after you two, we will have to conclude. I'm not sure. You can talk to her. Let's finish. Yes, Kamal, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. Please focus. Ji, Kamal.
I will talk about 3 issues. The first one is highly subjective nature of this theory. This theory is highly subjective. Every reader has their own interpretations, and what may be seen foregrounded by one reader may not be seen such as by other reader. And this causes a lack of consistency in the text analysis, and it becomes difficult to know the author's intention. Second issue is lack of empirical evidence. Now, this theory is developed for stylistic and linguistic features of the text, but we do not know how to measure these features and how these features affect the reading experience. There are 2 researchers named Van Peer and Hake-Mulder. They talk about this and they say that this theory claims that it increases the value and appreciation of text by the reader, but it do not provide any evidence for this assertion. And the third issue is limited applicability of this theory. This theory was developed to analyze poetry, but when we apply this theory to other genres of literature, it may be less effective than that. For example, if we apply this theory on drama or some non-fiction, we cannot see its effects better. It is better to analyze poetry, not other genres. So a better version of this theory can be made, a more comprehensive version to deal with all literature types. Thank you.
Several other critics have also brought up few issues on foregrounding theory that need to be taken into consideration to improve the theory. First of all, foregrounding theory is based on, we need to do some limitations on its deviation. Foregrounding deviation is based on how literary texts interact with cognitive and communicative principles. So its principles and assumptions are controlled, constrained. So Shen argues that if its principles are constrained, then there must be some limitations on deviation as well. And a detailed study on simile and oxymoron have shown that there are some possibility of doing limitation in deviation. Secondly, in foregrounding theory, there is more emphasis on text rather than its content. as we have seen that everybody was interested in text, not in content, what is written in the text. So critics argue that there should be some emphasis on content of the poem, which includes themes, characters, and other narrative elements to understand the text fully. Thirdly, there is vagueness in terminology of foregrounding theory. There are some terminologies that are used for foregrounding theory, for example, defamiliarization, deautomatization, and estrangement, which makes the issue obvious that do all these phrases have same meanings or are they distinct? Obviously, they are distinct. So, while naming the terminologies, we should consider its vocabulary and we should relate it to some psychological processes. Next, there's another problem in foregrounding theory, which is distinction between literary and non-literary texts. So all the literary devices that we have studied are used in literary texts, not in non-literary texts. So critics argue that these devices can also be applied on non-literary texts like jokes, advertisements, and politics. One of the critics also explained difference between two types of foregrounding. First is foregrounding in non-literary texts. Non-literary texts are those texts which we use in our everyday language, which its main purpose is communication. So use of foregrounding in our everyday communication is too much, and it is not also systematic in design. So and second one is use of foregrounding theory in literary texts. So use of foregrounding theory in literary texts. Purpose of use of foregrounding theory in literary text is to attract readers' attention and to deviate it from everyday language. So it is also very systematic and structured. So it should be done and it should not be done. So that's it.
ओके डॉक्टर साइमा कल क्लास नहीं लेंगी ये आप कह रहे हैं? मैं उनसे पूछ लेती हूँ उनकी क्लास कितने बजे होती है? कल कितने बजे होती है?
So, do you have any idea about Prague? No. Okay. Prague is the capital and the largest city in Czech Republic, the 13th largest city in the European Union, and it is the historical capital of Bohemia. So it is clear that it is a city. It is the name of city, Prague. Then our topic is Prague structuralist. It was basically an initial group of linguists and literary critics that was established in 1926 in Prague. So it was basically a school of literary thoughts and analysis that was introduced by William Matthias. ठीक है, आप लोगों ने खुद नाम याद रखने इनकी स्पेलिंग भी. इनके इस ग्रुप के prominent members were Roman Jacobson, Nikolai Trubetskoy, Danny Velik, Sergei Karsivsky, Dan Makarevsky. Okay. The systematic pattern of it was a diverse group of linguistic approach for the systematic approach in both language and literature. Its key principle. The key principle of Prague structuralist was to promote the idea that language being a structured system have certain components, and these components are interconnected and interdependent. Then a language focus. They emphasize that language should focus on analyzing these structures, that how these structures work on in language use. Then it means that when we are using some structures in language use, it basically how these structures work or function in language use. Okay. Then they basically stress, this group basically stress on the importance of contextualism. They said that along with this style, form and structures, context of the text is also very important and we cannot ignore it. Last but not the least, they introduced or they contributed in developing new ideas and methods that were used in both literature and language. Say you got the point? Yes. Okay, now it's over to Iman.
Assalamualaikum everyone. I hope all of you are doing well. So I'm going to explain Roman Jakobson's contribution in structuralism. So Roman Jakobson, he was a Russian formalist, and he was a formalist, linguist and theorist. And he stamped out the term, he was the first person who stamped out the term structuralism into linguistics. And he brought, practicality. First of all, he brought theoretical domains in the Prague school, because before him, these things were not present. And then he brought practicality into it. How so? By introducing it into, anthropology and then literature, and then, in symbolic behaviors. So in this way. And you all know about the 6 functions of Roman Jakobson. He is very famous for these functions. So these functions are referential function, emotive function, fatic function, conative function, poetic function, and meta function. So I'll describe what are these. Referential function is when a speaker is delivering the information to the audience. And then we have emotive function, it expresses the emotions of the speaker. And then we have fatic function, it is used to establish connection without communicating meaningful information. Then we have conative function, it focuses on the receiver of the message. And then poetic function, it expresses it expresses the way meaning is communicated, the style, the diction we use during our speech this way. So another important function is meta function that was developed. He was actually, before him there were people who introduced functions of language, but meta function was the new function that he introduced into the language. And meta function is the description of the language, the way we describe the language, the way we describe and the way we express the language. And then I have sent a speech of Gandhi at Kingsley Hall. He presented it was a political movement that he talked about in that speech. So I think you people can easily discover, and you people can easily interpret the speech, because I told you the function what are these. Because if I will explain them, then it will take a lot of time. And then he presented his theory of communication. In this theory, by the way, is very preeminent theory. And moreover, there are 6 elements that are necessary for communication. These are code, message, and receiver, sender, and contact. Then there is a famous text of Roman Jakobson, that is linguistic aspects of translation. He tells about translation, and he tells about the translation techniques, the scenarios that are involved in the translation. And then this work also tells about his works of semiotics. And then he describes the types of translation. These types are the interlingual, and then interlingual, and then intersemiotic. Do you have any idea about interlingual? Okay, I will. So interlingual translation, it's a translation and interpretation within the same language. For example, if I talk about English, when I say when our CR texted to ma'am that she said that, ma'am, are you coming? Then ma'am said, I'm not coming because I'm not feeling well, or I have some chores to do. So then CR will tell us that ma'am is not coming. She will not tell us that why she is not coming or. So this is a translation and interpretation within the same language. And then we have intralingual translation. This intralingual translation, the interpretation within another language. For example, if I say something in Urdu, and then the interpretation of that thing, for example, the way we present our presentation, the way we present our papers, if we use some Urdu words, just to make our audience feel and understand, comprehend that what it is, this is interlingual translation. Then we have intersemiotic translation. It's you all know semiotics. Ma'am Neelam told us in class that the study of signs. So it's a non-verbal language. And then the interpretation of signs by means of non-verbal sign system. For example, as like a novel to film, or a story to play, because the novel is written in the form of a text, then the characters that represent them. So it's an intersemiotic, that is non-verbal, not us tarah se verbal jaise hota hai. So another most thing that we reviewed his famous book, Fundamentals of Language. He wrote this book with the collaboration of Morris Haller.
And in this book, he focuses on linguistic, literature, again symbolic behaviors, because he deals with semiotics in his writings. And he focuses on the phonemic approach of the language, as I told, of the linguistic structures. And then he underpins the underlying structure that exists within the language. And the properties that he describes and that he manifests in his book, these are language as small units called phoneme. You all know about this. And he discusses the relationship between the phonemic system and the phonetic realities, how they work, how they function within the language. So he was a person who discusses these things. Before him, these things were not discussed. That's why he's called as the predominant, the preeminent, and the prevalent writer of his age. Then I'll be concluding this section that both Morrick, Helle, and Jacobson, they met beyond the traditional attitudes of classical and Renaissance sense of grammar before the linguistic utilization. So they discussed this in that way. I hope you all got it. If you have any query, you can ask for them. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Hansa Noor, and I will continue the presentation, and I will tell you about the contribution of radio matrices. The main topic of my presentation is the main contribution of radio matrices in Pratt structuralists. As Rusana and Evan had already told you about Pratt structuralist and Pratt structuralism. So I am going to tell you about. I will give you a little introduction of the critic, and the Bullroof will conclude it. William Mathesis, he was a Czech linguist. And a literary historian. He is considered as one of the founder of the structural functionalism in linguistics. So his main contribution, I will tell you about the main contribution, identification of issues and their addressing. So basically, his effort to identify issues and strive to address them were his main contribution to Czech scholarly heritage. Then he met two linguists in 1920. They were Roman Jacobson and Nikolai Trubetskoy. So along with Roman Jacobson and Nikolai, Mathesis created tropical structural analysis. So, what is tropical structural analysis? Tropical structural analysis is a technique for examining the semantic connection between the sentence theme and discourse overall topic. Then from 1926 to 1936, Mathes's interest changed to syntax and semantics. He conducted phonological research on the phonemes, functional load, and combinational potential. His interest in functional syntax and sentences began in 1936. That's all from my side. Now over to Gordon.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Eman Khan, and I will continue with the contribution of the Prague structuralism. Prague structuralism has a great influence on the semiotics, and they introduced the sign system. They introduced the ostensive signs. The ostensive signs are smiling face, eye contact, or direct speech. They introduced, for the first time, they introduced the sign systems. And the second contribution was They are best known for the phonology. The notion of voiced and voiceless was first introduced by the Prague structuralism. They introduced the voiced, they differentiate between the voiced and voiceless sounds. They say that voiced and voiceless sounds are distinguished on the presence or the absence of the distinctive features. When that distinctive features are present, then the words are known as voiced, and if they were absent, they are known as voiceless. And voice sounds are also, they vibrate the vocal cord, and voiceless, they are just moving through the mouth. They also discuss, and then they extending their phonological work to morphology and syntax, and they also tell about if the regular verb can be said is marked and unmarked on the basis of the past tense and the present tense. If the regular verb has, when we added a suffix ed to the regular verb, then those words will be known as a voiced. And if we don't add those suffixes and they are in the present tense, then those words will be known as a unmarked, mean voiceless. For example, if we look at the word die, so it is a present tense, and we don't add ed to it, which we add for the past tense. So it is known as voiceless, and if we add ed to it, so it is known as a voice. So this all were first influenced by the Prague structuralism. Then they also extend their work to phonological functions. They introduced the two functions, phonological function. One is the expressive function, and the second one is the demarcative function. The expressive function they use to express the mood and attitude of the writer or the author, and for this technique they use the language, and these all we study in the stylistic, that how the writer uses the expression and to convey their message to the reader. For example, they use sometimes those language in which they want to inform their readers. Sometimes they use language to apologize or justify question requests. They all use these techniques in their language to convey their message to the readers. And then the demarcative function to identify the grammatical unit of this speech. For example, if we look at the word return, if we stress on the first vowel of the word, then this will be known as the noun. And if we stress on the letter vowel, then it will be known as the verb. So this was also first influenced by the Prague structuralism. And then they also, Prague epistemology also distinguished between the activities of the ordinary readers and the literary student. Because the ordinary student did not notice all the things which were written by the writer, and the literary students can understand all these techniques. For example, if we look at the poem and the writer uses the punctuation mark, full stops, and words that are repeating alliteration and consonant. So the normal people will not understand their meaning and their importance, but the literary students, which they were studying and they were already known for about that things, so they will understand their meaning and their importance. So this was all from my side. Now
Assalamualaikum, I am Humali. I will further continue the contribution of the Prague school. Actually, Prague school give the idea of the language. They say that the language is a structured system, and each component of this structured system are interdependent and interconnected. For example, we combine the sounds and it form phonemes, and the phonemes combine to form morphemes, and then the morphemes combine to form words, and then phrases, and then clauses and sentences. So they say that they are all interconnected. We can't separate them. And further, they give the idea of that structuralism and functionalism are interconnected. They said that during study of language, we should have to focus on analyzing the structure and their function and communication. They said that the structure and function should be analyzed simultaneously timed with each other. Then they further give the idea of the contextualism. Unlike the practical criticism and the new criticism, who were saying that we should focus on the words on page. They say that no, the words on page is not enough for understanding the real meaning. Actually, the real meaning comes from the context, the historical, historical, cultural, or political context. For example, we have this poem Rebel by Daud Kamal. By looking at the words on the page, 8 words suggest that there is a person who is a rebellious one and he is shooted by the people. But by looking at the political context, we will come to know that it is actually a political satire. The poet is actually mocking at the politics of their time, who were killing people innocently without any guilt, but just because of their rebellious attitude, their different attitude. So this is all from myself.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Guru and I will be discussing some of the contribution of the William Matthias, who is a Prague structuralist. So William Matthias was a Czech linguist and a literary historian. He was also the co-founder. He was also the co-founder of this structural functionalism. So what is the structural functionalism? Structural functionalism, it is actually an approach in linguistics that is concerned about the function of the language, and it considers language. It considers that the function of the language determines the structure of the language. And in this regard, 3 important functions of language are very important. The three functions of the language are cognitive function. As you all know that language is used to cognitive function. First one is the cognitive function. As we all know that the cognitive function of the language is like using language to convey factual information. For instance, like we say like, for example, like in medicine field, it's other experimentation, etc. Then we have expressive function. Expressive function, we all know that language is used to express feelings and emotions. For example, we use language in poetry to express our feelings and emotion. Then the third number function of language is cognitive function. Like this function is used to address the addressee, to bring some change in the environment. For example, if I say Fatima to bring the chair here, so I'm demanding from that person to bring change in this environment. So these 3 functions are very important in this regard in order to in structural functionalism. Then we talk about the synchronic and diachronic approach. Actually, he was not the pioneer of the synchronic and the diachronic approach in the linguistics, but his early work pioneered the synthesis of synchronic and diachronic approach. Actually, another linguist, his name is Ferdinand de Saussure. Actually, he was the pioneer of the
Ferdinand de Saussure.
I'm unable to pronounce this name. Why, I don't know.
It's fine. आप इसको जैसे मर्जी pronounce करें.
Actually, he was the pioneer of the synchronic and diachronic approach. Actually,
we also mispronounce our names.
So these are the 2 approaches in the linguistics: synchronic and diachronic approach. Synchronic approach consider language at a movement and aim to describe language at a particular period of time without considering its history and background. While the diachronic approach of the language is something that like a study language while considering its history and evolution. For example, if we study for instance, if we study the word order in Old English, just study the word order in a sentence in Old English, that would be a synchronic approach. But if we study the word order in a sentence from Old English to Middle English, then from Middle English to Modern English, that would be a diachronic approach, like we considering the evolution of language and how like the changes in the language. So that would be diachronic approach. Then he also talked about the he proceeded the Saussurian dichotomy of speech and language. So dichotomy actually dividing something into 2 that are same but at the same time contradictory. So the one of the dichotomy of language and speech is land and parole. So first, like language is like it is the if you say like language is the natural tendency of all human beings to use and produce the language, and the language is divided into lang and parole. Lang is the abstract system shared by all the speaker of the same language, while the parole is the individual use of the language. For example, if you talk about Pashto, so it's like Pashto language has its grammar, has its structure, it has some all abstract system. So it is like land. But if I am the individual speaker of the Pashto, I am speaking, so I am the parole of that language. Thank you.
You are the practical
Now we'll take half here and half here.
Okay.
My name is Mukannas and I will conclude this whole discussion. To conclude all the discussion, the general approach in the study of language or the Pratt's school can be described as the combination of a structuralism and functionalism. These approaches are interconnected and interlinked with each other as language is a subsystem. How language is a subsystem? As it includes phonetics, phonology, morphology, lexicology, syntax, and semantics. As it is a subsystem of a language, which has its own problems, but they are never isolated because they are part of a large whole. How they are part of a large whole? As the one language has its connection with other languages as well. Language is never in a state of equilibrium, but rather it has many deviations. What deviation is? Any distortion of use of language, or a person may use verb where a noun is necessary or a noun is expected. These deviations allow language to develop and function as a linguistic system. Now, Pratt School brought new approaches and new methods in linguistics in studying language. It emphasizes two basic approaches. First is linguistic science and the second is the communication. The central tenet of Pratt School fulfills the range of, as language fulfills the range of a function in a society. Thank you.
Marksni, where is Zonia?
She told that she will not do this because her mother was not feeling that, so
Okay. Kulrukh ने कर दिया है. What about Areej Tariq? तो जोनिया का क्या है?
Zonia ka, we talked to you that her mother was not feeling well, so I presented on that.
ओके. आपके मार्क्स जो हैं वहाँ पर अपलोड हो जाएंगे गूगल क्लासरूम में. ठीक है, मोस्टली हो चुके हैं. जिसका है वो मैं अपलोड कर दूँगी, और जो ये फीडबैक मैंने लिखा है इनके पिक्चर्स लेके मैं अपलोड कर दूँगी. यू कैन रीड इट. पढ़ा जा सकता है. राइट, अटेंडेंस आपकी लग गई है. थैंक यू सो मच. अल्लाह हाफ़िज़. एंजॉय. हाँ जी.